Hello everyone and welcome to episode 59 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we're going to be discussing the standing overhead press. So previously within the last few episodes I've discussed the deadlift, the bench press and the low bar back squat. So today I thought I'd discuss another big compound exercise, the standing overhead press, arguably one of the best overall shoulder exercises. The main reason being is just because you can use a lot of weight using this exercise. So whether it's the standing overhead press or seated overhead press, these big compound movements should make up the main focus of your training because you can literally move the most amount of weight, and as a result we can focus on driving up volume, which is the biggest determining factor for hypertrophy, as long as the load is heavy enough. So some of the common mistakes I see, and I'll be honest, probably up until a couple of years ago, I was also performing this incorrectly. So if you listen to this podcast and you think, actually, I'm not performing this correctly, don't panic, because like I said, even myself, I was doing this incorrectly up until a couple of years ago. So some of the biggest issues I see is people almost treating this like a incline barbell bench press, in the sense that typically when you see people do this, they'll have their head held back and they'll be focusing on driving the weight almost in front of them. So you can imagine the person now is leant back and they're trying to drive the bar overhead, yet the reality is they're actually moving the bar almost out in front of them. So one of the things we're going to be focusing on in this podcast is really focusing on actually creating a straight up and down bar path, and that really involves ducking the head underneath the bar, which I'll explain in a second, and making sure you're actually focusing on a straight up and down bar path and not getting stuck behind the bar, which is such a common mistake I see. So how do we perform this lift? So first of all, I'd suggest using a squat rack, ideally with movable pins, and therefore you can set the adjustable pins in the bar suitable to yourself, the correct height. And for most individuals that's probably going to be about shoulder height, and then you can easily unwrap the weight before pressing the weight overhead. So initially, hand position, this is going to be personal preference, also a little bit subject to limb length, but for the most part your hand position is going to be just outside shoulder width apart. Now from this position, really make sure that the bar is actually in the palm. You don't want the bar to be in the fingers, otherwise the wrist will have a tendency to cock back. You're not going to be in the strongest position. Really want that bar in the palm, and as a result the bar is going to go directly straight down through the wrist. That's how you want to imagine this. Additionally, make sure you've got that thumb wrapped around the bar. You see so many times when I see people, the thumb not wrapped around the bar. The same goes to the bench press. It's just, I know it's a popular thing to do, but it's just not safe. You imagine you can easily drop this, and like I said, do you really want to be dropping something when you've got a bar being pushed over your head? Make sure that thumb is actually wrapped underneath the bar. Now from this position, another common error I see is people having their hips too far back. So don't have the hips behind the bar. You want to be in a position where from a side angle we've got the bar, you've got your shoulders, you've got your hips and you've got your ankles all in a nice straight line. So I personally have a tendency as well for my hips to be a little bit too far back, so really focus on driving those hips forward, making sure your glutes are engaged and you push your hips out so that they're directly underneath your shoulders and in line with your ankles. Feet position is probably going to be at shoulder width as well. And from this position here, we're really focusing on, similar to what I've mentioned with the squat and the deadlift, really focus on bracing your core correctly for this lift, because again, this is another way you can easily increase poundages on the bar just by bracing your core effectively. And that basically means pushing your stomach out, and basically imagine if someone's going to punch you in the stomach, what would your stomach position be in? That will be in that brace position. So abdominals are pushed out, focusing on having a big deep breath, and from there we're focusing also squeezing our glutes. So core's tight, glutes are tight, and that will help to keep the hips underneath the shoulders, and the bar is going to be resting on top of the clavicle. So the clavicle is the collarbone, so you can imagine now we've got hands just wide and shoulder width apart and bars resting on top of the collarbone, the clavicle. Now from here, this is the key thing I want you to focus on. Your head is going to be pulled back slightly, and this is going to allow the bar to go in an absolute straight line. and I want you to focus on driving the bar past your head in a straight line, so with the head pulled back slightly, and then as soon as that bar passes your head, you're then ducking your head underneath the bar, and as a result this will allow you to lock the weight out directly overhead, and therefore there'll be a straight bar path. And then as the bar comes back down, the head moves back slightly, bar rests on top of the clavicle, you then press again past your face and then lock the head out in front of you. So this looks significantly different to what you've probably done yourself or what you've seen other people do in the gym, because they have a tendency to keep the head behind them. Make sure you're not doing this. Make sure you're actually using the most efficient motion possible, and that is to have a straight up and down bar path, and you're just going to have to move your head back slightly until the bar passes your face, and then you're ducking your head underneath the bar. Now at the top of the movement there's a little bit of debate whether you should actually shrug the weight up. I imagine doing a barbell shrug and actually shrugging the weight up, and this can be done especially if you've got superb shoulder mobility, like for instance a gymnast or a Olympic weightlifter. But for most people that don't have the shoulder mobility to be able to do this safely, so as a result I wouldn't suggest actually shrugging at the top of the movement. Just focus on that full lockout at the top, making sure that bar is directly overhead, and then repeat the exercise. Now one thing we're focusing on with this top position, keeping a straight bar path at the top of the movement and a full lockout, is in addition to your delt to be able to hold the weight above you, we've also got the musculature, and the upper back is also helping to maintain this top position. This is why it's such a strong and safe position at the top of the movement directly overhead, is we've actually got the upper back muscles actually helping to maintain that weight above your head. In addition to this, one thing to focus on as well is trying to keep your elbows relatively tucked. So by doing this we can actually get a little bit more tricep activation throughout the movement, which is going to help with actually lifting heavier weights. Instead of the tendency to flare the elbows out, which is going to be difficult to do, and that's going to be the natural thing you're going to want to do subconsciously, is actually focus on keeping them elbows tucked throughout the movement and focusing on keeping those elbows pointing forwards as much as possible. So hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you can start applying this immediately. Like I said, not many people perform this exercise like I described, so make sure you've taken notes during this episode. You can start applying this immediately. It might be worth also looking at some tutorial videos on YouTube just to see exactly what I'm describing, being able to actually visually see what I'm saying within this podcast. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, you go to James Layton, Layton Fitness.co.uk. You'll see a tab at the top of the page to download the free ebook. I'd also suggest listening to all my other podcast episodes on iTunes or on my website, and you can learn more about myself and some of the products and services I have on the website as well. So look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care.